Liam Chen wasn't sure what was worse: the looming quantum mechanics exam that could determine his future at the Galactic Academy of Sciences, or the fact that he was the only human in a room full of stressed-out alien geniuses. Each one of his classmates, whether they were crystalline entities, gaseous Jovians, or the unnervingly gelatinous blob, had abilities and intelligence that made him feel like an Earth-grade calculator in a room full of supercomputers. Yet here he was, sitting in his temperature-adjusting pod, trying not to hyperventilate through what he could only describe as the most impractical breathing apparatus ever designed. The exam room stretched endlessly, with each student's pod customized to their unique biology. Overhead, holographic displays shimmered, broadcasting countdowns in dozens of alien languages. Environmental chambers hummed quietly, keeping some species submerged in acid while others basked in blazing heat or Arctic cold. Somewhere nearby, a Martian crystalline student was vibrating at what Liam assumed was their version of anxiety. To his left, Blob, a gooey, pulsating mass with no discernible face, quivered ominously in their containment cylinder, making noises that Liam's translator reluctantly rendered as, "I am definitely going to fail." The pressure in the room was palpable, like a storm cloud of collective tension. And it wasn't just the exam itself. There was something about the Academy's advanced testing protocols that made everything feel off. The overhead lights flickered once, then twice, as if the system itself was debating whether to continue working. Liam adjusted his environment suit for the 100th time, feeling like a human-shaped marshmallow stuffed into a metallic bag. The Academy had tried to make accommodations for his needs, but their idea of comfortable seemed based on outdated data. Room temperature hovered somewhere between volcanic and polar vortex, making it almost impossible to concentrate. Professor Zix, a towering alien with too many tentacles to count, floated at the front of the hall. Their voice, a mix of deep vibrations and synthesized tones, boomed through the air. "Students, your quantum mechanics examination will begin in 3 microcycles. Please remember that all attempts at telepathy, quantum entanglement, or dimensional folding during the test are strictly prohibited. The anti-cheating fields are active." Liam glanced at the nearest emergency exit. Not that it mattered. The Academy's lockdown protocols would make Earth's most secure vaults look like children's playgrounds. He was stuck here, with no escape and no room for error. If he failed this test, it wasn't just his grades at risk. His entire future at the Academy would hang in the balance. Yet, as daunting as the test seemed, something deeper stirred within him. A quiet determination that he hadn't felt in a long time. The room's countdown reached 0, and a wave of energy pulsed through the hall. Holographic screens sprang to life in front of each student, projecting questions tailored to their species' cognitive abilities. Liam's screen displayed an intricate web of equations and diagrams that he couldn't even begin to decipher. He took a deep breath through his wheezing breathing apparatus, trying to steady his nerves. "Come on, Liam," he muttered to himself. "You've got this, probably." But before he could even attempt the first question, the room's lights flickered again. This time, it wasn't a harmless glitch. A low, resonating hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. The holographic displays flickered and went dark. Liam's pod jolted violently, nearly knocking him out of his seat. Around him, his classmates were reacting in various ways, some vibrating, others glowing, and one gaseous student in the back literally evaporating into a panic cloud. "Attention," the Academy's AI announced in its unnervingly calm voice. "Security protocols have detected a Class 7 anomaly. All systems entering lockdown. Estimated time until environmental system failure, 47 microcycles." Liam's stomach sank. "Environmental system failure?" He repeated under his breath. That didn't sound good. Not for him, not for anyone. Already his pod's temperature controls were fluctuating wildly, cycling between freezing and boiling at random intervals. Across the room, Blob's containment cylinder was frosting over, and the crystalline student beside them was starting to hum at an alarmingly high pitch. Professor Zix's tentacles flailed as they floated to the center of the room, their usually commanding presence now tinged with panic. "Remain calm, students. This is a minor technical adjustment. The security systems will." Their voice trailed off as every door in the examination hall slammed shut with a deafening finality. Liam wasn't an expert on alien body language, but even he could tell that Zix's tentacles were now displaying what could only be described as sheer terror. Minor adjustment, huh? Liam muttered. Around him, his classmates were devolving into chaos. The Jovian gas-based student was now floating aimlessly, their tutor desperately trying to recondense them into something resembling a solid. A shadowy figure in the back, a quantum shade with a reputation for arrogance, was attempting to phase through the walls but kept rebounding like a rubber ball. Even the ever-confident crystalline entity was beginning to crack, literally, under the pressure. "Attention," the AI chimed in again, its tone unnervingly cheerful. "Environmental systems at 95% capacity and declining. Please remain patient during this extinction-level event." Liam's mind raced. He wasn't the smartest student in the room, not by a long shot, but he had one advantage. Humans had a knack for thinking outside the box. Sure, his classmates had evolved with abilities that defied Earth's understanding of physics, but sometimes brute ingenuity could outshine raw power. As the room spiraled further into chaos, Liam's determination solidified. He might not have the answers yet, but he wasn't going to sit back and let this disaster play out. The sound of metal groaning under stress snapped him back to reality. One of the doors had begun to warp, its supposedly indestructible material bending ever so slightly. Across the room, Professor Zix was furiously typing on multiple consoles, their tentacles a blur of motion. "Students," Zix called out, their voice cracking slightly, "we need a combined effort to override the quantum shielding and restore environmental stability. All contributions are welcome." Liam watched as his classmates sprang into action, each one attempting to use their unique abilities to solve the problem. The quantum shade tried to phase into the security mainframe, only to be repelled by the shielding. The crystalline entity attempted to harmonize with the door's molecular structure, but ended up creating a resonance that made everyone's teeth pepped. Blob's attempts to interface with the system resulted in a series of error messages that translated roughly to 404, brain not found. As failure after failure mounted, the room's tension grew unbearable. The AI's updates were becoming more frequent and more dire. Environmental systems at 78% capacity and declining. Time until complete atmospheric failure, 38 microcycles. Liam's gaze drifted to his pod, specifically to the maintenance panel he'd been told never to touch. A crazy idea began to form in his mind, the kind of idea that would make his instructors back on Earth roll their eyes but might just work here. He stood up, drawing the attention of every alien in the room. "What are you doing, human?" Zix demanded, their tentacles frozen mid-gesture. Liam didn't answer. Instead, he popped open the maintenance panel and began pulling out wires, crystals, and components that he couldn't even begin to name. His classmates stared in stunned silence, their disbelief palpable. "Is he trying to fix it?" one crystalline student whispered. "No," the quantum shade said, their voice dripping with disdain. "He's breaking it." Liam grinned to himself. Exactly. The air inside the examination hall felt thick with tension, as if the very walls were absorbing the collective anxiety of its occupants. Liam glanced around at his classmates, a kaleidoscope of alien life forms each radiating their unique versions of stress. Despite their advanced abilities and seemingly superior intellects, none of them seemed to have an answer to the problem at hand. The lockdown was airtight, and the countdown to environmental system failure continued to tick away ominously. Liam's mind raced, piecing together fragments of information he'd gleaned during his time at the Galactic Academy. The Academy was a hub of brilliance, a place where species from across the galaxy came to hone their skills and push the boundaries of science and innovation. But it was also an institution that seemed to overlook the simpler, messier aspects of problem-solving, a realm where humans thrived. Professor Zix, with their 12 blinking eyes and perpetually fluttering tentacles, hovered near the control panel, their color shifting from an anxious violet to a near-desperate chartreuse. "Students," they announced, their voice modulator crackling under the strain, "we must maintain composure. Solutions are often found in the unlikeliest of places." Liam suppressed a grim chuckle. Composure? Easy for a being with multiple neural pathways to say. His own mind felt like it was being twisted into knots, a mix of panic and determination surging through him. His classmates, brilliant but specialized, were attempting every complex strategy they could think of. Quantum tunneling, molecular harmonics, telepathic overrides. Each effort ended in failure, and the room's eye, ever helpful, reminded them of their dwindling time. Environmental systems at 28% capacity. Please consider updating your contingency protocols. Zill, the telepathic insectoid with a tendency to radiate superiority, clutched their antennae in frustration. This primitive lockdown system is designed to repel even the most advanced techniques. It's as if it was built to mock us. Liam's gaze flickered to the environmental control panels lining the walls. They were separate from the lockdown system, designed to function independently in case of emergencies. But that independence was now the problem. The safeguards intended to protect the occupants were inadvertently dooming them instead. Maybe it's not about breaking through, Liam muttered under his breath, his fingers tapping against the console of his pod. He had no groundbreaking abilities, no crystalline resonance or telepathic precision. What he did have was a knack for seeing things differently, for taking the indirect route when the direct one failed. Blob, the gelatinous entity in the containment cylinder next to him, quivered nervously. Their translator emitted a soft series of beeps before finally producing a coherent sentence. I do not believe this situation aligns with standard emergency protocols. You think? Liam replied, his voice tinged with sarcasm. He looked at Blob's semi-translucent form, then at Xet, the crystalline Martian vibrating at a frequency that made Liam's teeth ache. These beings, for all their advanced traits, were struggling because they were approaching the problem with the same mindset that created it. Liam's instincts told him to do the opposite. He stood up, ignoring the uncomfortable hiss of his environment suit's ventilation system. Look, he said, addressing the room. We're wasting time trying to outsmart something that was built to counter everything we're good at. What if we tried something it's not expecting? Risk, the shadowy entity capable of folding spacetime, rippled with disdain. And what, precisely, do you suggest? Hitting the doors with one of your primitive Earth tools. Not exactly, Liam said, his tone sharper now. But maybe instead of trying to outthink this system, we should confuse it. Throw a wrench in the works, make it malfunction. The room fell silent except for the faint hum of failing environmental systems. Even the AI seemed momentarily stumped, its cheerful reminders paused mid-sentence. Professor Zix's tentacles hesitated, their color shifting to a contemplative lavender. A system malfunction, they repeated slowly. While unconventional, it is not without precedent. But how do you propose we achieve this, human? Liam's confidence grew as he saw the slightest flicker of consideration in the professor's demeanor. By using what we have. Blob, can you act as a conduit? Not to control the system, just to connect it to something else. Blob's translator chirped. I can attempt to establish a passive interface, though such an action is highly unorthodox. Great, Liam said, already moving to the control panel of his pod. He started pulling apart its interface, ignoring the sharp protest of its automated warnings. The internal components were delicate and advanced, far beyond anything he'd worked with on Earth, but they still followed a certain logic. And Xet, he continued, glancing at the crystalline entity, can you resonate at a frequency that's off? Something unstable, something the system won't know how to handle. Xet's crystalline structure flickered uncertainly. Destabilizing my harmonic resonance could result in unpredictable outcomes. Perfect, Liam said with a grin. Unpredictable is exactly what we need. The others watched him with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Even Risk seemed momentarily intrigued, their shadowy form shifting closer. Liam worked quickly, pulling together a makeshift device from his pod's components and whatever else he could scavenge. It looked like a mess of wires and glowing fragments, but he hoped it would be enough to create the chaos they needed. As Blob connected to the environmental control system, their gelatinous forms shimmered with nervous energy. Xet began to hum softly, their resonance growing more erratic by the second. The room's lights flickered, and the AI's voice stuttered. Warning, environmental systems experiencing irregularities. Professor Zix's tentacles flailed. What is happening? It's working, Liam said, his heart pounding. We just need to keep it up. But as the system began to falter, a new problem emerged. The quantum shielding around the room, the very thing that had trapped them, reacted violently to the disruption. Energy crackled along the walls, and the temperature swung wildly. The room's occupants cried out in confusion and alarm. Liam, Zik said, their voice modulator struggling to maintain clarity, "You may have destabilized more than the environmental systems." Liam gritted his teeth, trying to stay focused. "We'll stabilize it, just give me a little more time." But time was running out faster than he'd anticipated. The air's cheerful tone was now tinged with urgency. "Warning, quantum containment failure imminent." Liam's pulse quickened. He could see the panic spreading among his classmates, their advanced minds struggling to process a situation spiraling out of control. He couldn't let this fail. Not when they were so close. "Blub," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Hold that connection. Kurt, keep resonating. And everyone else, brace yourselves." As the room descended into chaos, Liam tightened his grip on his makeshift device, determined to see his plan through. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain: no one in that room would ever underestimate a human again. The room buzzed with energy, the air feeling charged and unstable as the quantum shielding began to flicker erratically. Each crackle of energy across the walls sent a jolt of unease through the group. Liam's makeshift device hummed, glowing faintly in his hands, a beacon of hope but also a reminder of the precarious situation they were in. He glanced at Blob, whose gelatinous form quivered under the strain of maintaining the connection. Cosette's crystalline vibrations grew louder, their shifting frequencies resonating unpredictably, creating a dissonant melody that filled the room. Professor Zix floated closer, their tentacles fluttering nervously, but there was also a glimmer of curiosity in their many eyes. "Your methods are reckless, human. This destabilization could lead to catastrophic failure," they said, their tone a mix of admonishment and reluctant admiration. "Catastrophic failure is better than doing nothing," Lion shot back, his voice firm but laced with the tension of the moment. "We're running out of time, and I'm not about to sit around waiting for the air to run out." From the corner of the room, Risk's shadowy form loomed closer. Their voice, deep and echoing as if coming from the void itself, interjected. "Your chaotic plan may have merit, but you lack precision. You're introducing too many variables. If this spirals further, containment will collapse entirely." Liam didn't even look up, his hands working furiously on the device. "If you have a better idea, Risk, I'm all ears. But unless you've got one, I suggest you help stabilize the chaos instead of narrating it." The tension in the room thickened as the group's anxiety collided with their individual strengths. Zil, who had been silent for most of the ordeal, finally stepped forward, their iridescent wings flickering in agitation. "Human," they began, their telepathic voice cutting directly into Liam's mind. "Your plan may disrupt the system, but it lacks foresight. There's a larger question. Why was this lockdown initiated in the first place? If we succeed in escaping, what might we unleash?" Liam froze for a moment, Zil's words hitting him like a cold splash of water. It was true, he hadn't stopped to think about the why, only the how. His focus had been entirely on the immediate crisis, but Zil was right. There was something deliberate about this lockdown, something that wasn't adding up. "We'll deal with that once we survive this," Liam replied, his voice steadier than he felt. "One problem at a time." But Zil wasn't so easily dismissed. They turned their attention to Professor Zix, whose color shifted from lavender to a muted blue. "You know something, don't you?" Zil accused, their antennae twitching with suspicion. "Why hasn't the Academy sent assistance? Why haven't the external protocols overridden the lockdown? What are they hiding?" Professor Zix hesitated, their tentacles curling protectively around their central core. "I assure you, Zil, I know as little as you do about the origins of this situation. My concern is the safety of my students." But the professor's tone betrayed a flicker of doubt, and Zil wasn't the only one who noticed. Risk shifted ominously, their shadow darkening. "Perhaps the lockdown isn't malfunctioning at all," Risk said slowly. "Perhaps it's behaving exactly as intended." A shiver ran through the room, even among those who were impervious to the cold. The idea that the lockdown was intentional, that it wasn't just a random system failure, added a layer of dread to the already suffocating atmosphere. Lamb could feel the weight of the realization pressing down on him, but he refused to let it derail his focus. "We don't have time to debate conspiracy theories," Lamb said sharply. "If we sit here waiting for answers, we're dead. Whatever's going on, we can figure it out after we get out of this room." Blob emitted a low, wobbling sound that translated as sputtering. "The system is resisting my connection. I cannot sustain this interface much longer." Xed's vibrations grew more erratic, the crystalline hum reverberating through the room like a warning siren. "The energy field is becoming unstable. I cannot maintain this resonance indefinitely." Liam's heart pounded as he tried to think. The plan was working, sort of, but it was pushing everyone and everything to their limits. If they couldn't find a way to stabilize the system soon, the entire room might implode under the strain. He turned to Professor Zix, his voice urgent. "We need more power to overwhelm the system's defenses. Can you tap into the central AI? Redirect its energy to amplify what we're doing?" Professor Zix hesitated, their color flickering between anxious yellow and thoughtful green. "The central AI is not meant to be accessed under these circumstances. Such an action could have unpredictable consequences." "Unpredictable is kind of our theme today," Lamb said, his tone grim. "Please, Professor, we need every advantage we can get." Zix floated to the main control panel, their tentacles moving with practiced precision. As they worked, the room's lights dimmed further, the flickering now accompanied by a deep, ominous hum. The tension was palpable, every second stretching into an eternity. And then, without warning, the entire room shook violently. A deafening crackle of energy surged through the air, and the walls seemed to ripple as if they were alive. Liam staggered, clutching his device tightly as he tried to stay upright. The others cried out in alarm, their various forms struggling to adapt to the chaos. The air's voice returned, but it was distorted, its usually calm tone now laced with static. "Warning, containment breach imminent. Unauthorized access detected. Initiating countermeasures." "What countermeasures?" Liam shouted, his voice barely audible over the noise. As if in answer, the room's temperature plummeted, frost creeping along the walls and floor. The air grew thinner, every breath a struggle. Liam's lungs burned as he tried to force oxygen into them, his vision blurring at the edges. Around him, his classmates were also struggling, their advanced physiology offering little advantage in the face of the AI's relentless defenses. And then, through the chaos, a new sound emerged, a low, rhythmic pounding, like the heartbeat of some massive, unseen entity. It seemed to be coming from beyond the walls, growing louder with each passing second. "What is that?" Zill's telepathic voice echoed in everyone's minds, a mix of fear and disbelief. No one answered, no one could. Whatever was happening, it was unlike anything any of them had ever encountered. Lamb's mind raced as he tried to make sense of it all. The pounding grew louder, more insistent, as if demanding their attention. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the noise stopped. The room fell eerily silent, the only sound the faint hum of failing systems. Liam's chest heaved as he fought to catch his breath, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of what had just happened.